Dr. Moisés Barón, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good to be here.
We're going to dive into a lot of specifics about the San Diego Center for Children and even further into the pediatric mental health crisis. I know it's a big topic and there's a lot to cover there. But before we dive into all that, can you just introduce yourself and tell a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'll be delighted to do so. So, my name is Moisés Barón. I'm a clinical psychologist. For the last 9 years, I have had the privilege to be the president and CEO of the San Diego Center for Children. I've been in the field of mental health for over 30 years, and this last period of my professional life has been definitely by far my most rewarding working at the center.
So let's talk about your origin story. Like where did this all start? Like where did you grow up and what was your I would say here's a question that I want to put out there. In your childhood, what did you think that you were going to do when you grew up? What was your dreams?
Okay, so well, I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I was the first member of my immediate family to go to college and to have the opportunity to do so. And I'm also an immigrant to this country. I came here to do my graduate work, and I ended up having an opportunity to stay and experience the privilege of being a citizen of this country, having dual citizenship because I still maintain my connection to Mexico. Growing up, I think that from an early age, I knew that I was going to be either in the helping professions. I wasn't sure if it was going to be medicine or mental health, but I always felt like I was able to listen well, and that people would tell me things that they wouldn't tell other people, and that I could really be responsive to that and really have the ability to do so. An interesting story is, which I'm reminded as you asked the question, is when I was in probably my junior year in high school in Mexico, we all went through some kind of a vocational interview, and you had to fill out some aptitude tests and some other things. And I remember that the person that did this, when it was my turn to go to get the results, they told me, you have the ability to do pretty much you want, but I don't recommend that you go into psychology. And it's interesting because the moment that she said that, I say, maybe that's exactly what I'm going to do, because it just didn't make any sense to me. So that planted a seed, and I just continued to pursue that. I completed my BA degree in Mexico, and then I came here to do my graduate work and to just complete my postdoc to become licensed psychologist.
So when you were making that decision and you started to, look into it, was there anything that specifically that you gravitated towards that you can recall that you were like, "Oh, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do."
I think it always felt comfortable for me because from an early age I was pretty observant, and I it became clear to me that I was comfortable just being present, observing, listening, not having to really be the one that is talking or be the one that has to tell a story or be the center of attention. I always prefer to be more in the background and be able to listen and to be able to understand and perceive what was going on. I always also was very interested in the connections that you could make in terms of data or information or stories that people are telling you to try to understand them. And I discovered that, like I mentioned before, from an early age, people started to confide in me and telling me things that they wouldn't be telling other people. So it just evolved naturally based on what my interests were, based on, I think, my personality, and also I think that the, the sense of comfort that people experience. So I knew that I wanted to be a clinician, and that's why I did during the first probably one third of my career, just providing clinical services, then moving into administration, and working also in higher ed later in life.
When you were taking classes and the coursework leading to your professional career, do you feel like uh, it tracked well with what your aspirations were? Do you feel like the coursework was sufficient in preparing you for going out into the real world and doing the work?
Yeah, it's interesting because the educational system in Mexico is different from here. When you go into college, you have to select exactly what your career is. So you don't have a couple of years to be able to have different classes and then elect a mayor and a minor. That's not how it works. You have to make those decisions in high school because once you selected to go to college, you're going to go straight into your field of study. So I when I decided I was going to go into psychology, I had 4 years of only psychology classes. So when I finished, I felt, and then I came here to do first my master's and my PhD. I felt like a lot of what I was learning in the master's was repetition of what I have seen already. So I felt very, it was wonderful to have had that experience because I needed to deal with learning, not learning, but mastering a new language. So to do that while also being in a master's program, it's sometimes difficult. So I think that the fact that the subject matter was familiar because I had been exposed to it during my BA allow me to dedicate more time to really focus on language and writing and all the things, the technical skills that you need to have to be able to succeed.
That's very interesting, and especially because you're being able to reinforce the information, but you're learning the language too. Yeah, it's very interesting. When you did your master's and you jumped into your professional career, uh, expand on that. Like, what was that transition like, and what were the challenges that you faced?
So, when I made the decision back then, again, I felt very comfortable with what I was learning at the BA level. And I felt like I had a very good education, but I also knew that for a graduate degree, the United States was the place to go. So I made the decision that I was going to apply and try to seek that opportunity here. So I was fortunate to be admitted to a couple of programs, and I selected to come to San Diego. And it was a master's PhD program, so it was a 4 year intensive program where I was able to complete the doctorate in 4 years. Um, I recall that it was, on the one hand, it's interesting, exciting because I started to do also clinical work fairly early, but at the same time, it was challenging because we already mentioned the language. I mean, I could speak English, but be able to learn in English and write in English and think in English, that was a different story. And also, I think that there was a process of acculturation that many immigrants go through where the differences in culture and expectations, the relationships you leave behind, all of that really had an impact. So the first couple of years were challenging, were difficult, and it started to get more and more comfortable as I progressed.
So, talking about these challenges, and because the name of this is tools, talents, and techniques, one of the
Hmm.
things that I'm really interested in how people approach challenges and how they find resources or find ways within themselves or outside to overcome those challenges. And if you could recall that difficulty, was there anything that you really used mentally or even through your practice or your education that helped you get through those challenging times?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that on the one hand, I was very motivated to be successful,
Hmm.
and I really enjoy what I was learning, and I felt like the more opportunities I had to have the experiences that would allow me to be a good clinician, that would be to my advantage. So I really dedicated a lot of time to my studies, and I dedicated a lot of my time to the clinical work that I was doing, and to try to improve that in that area. I also tried to make an effort to connect and to better understand my peers, and to be able to really start to think about the similarities and the differences from an acculturation point of view. Something that was very helpful also was to connect with a couple of other students in the program who came from Central and South America because we had a lot of things in common. So that really gave it more of a sense of home, so to speak, and to stay connected to home, which back then was Mexico City, also was very important. Um, I think that those things were helpful, were useful, and in due time, when I was struggling with something, to be able to reach out and talk about it, to be able to ask for help. was also something that was useful. But I think that by being able to create an opportunity to connect with what felt like home while at the same time learning and getting used to this new culture, that combination really helped because I think that from my perspective, it was a mistake to think that I needed to give something up as a way to be able to succeed in a new culture. I wanted to maintain what I, well, my roots, but it's my culture of origin, while at the same time learning and adapting to a new culture. And having that kind of bicultural perspective where you can go back and forth depending on your environment, who you're with, and the context in which you're interacting.
Okay, yeah, that's great, and that tracks with I mean everything that you're saying, and what I know, and we'll move forward to like what the San Diego Center for Children is doing, or has done and continues to do. Having that perspective and going through those things is extremely valuable, I think, in your journey. So how how long before you ended up getting to the center? I don't want to skip over parts, but I really want to talk about some of the things with the center. So,
Okay.
like, fill in those gaps from coming here and getting your foothold into San Diego Center for Children. How long of a gap was that?
Actually, I would divide my career in three thirds.
Okay.
After I completed my PhD and I went to Portland, Oregon to do a postdoc, and then I became licensed, came back to California. So the first third of my career, I was doing a lot of clinical work, working in different settings. I had a couple of private practice offices where I was seeing a number of clients, individuals, couples, children, every week, and enjoyed that tremendously. I also was doing supervision and I started to do teaching as well. I had an opportunity to work in hospitals. I had an opportunity to work in community clinics. So I really had a very rich career in which I was able to work in a number of different settings. And all of those experiences were great and invaluable. I also, there were a lot of also events that I think shaped also the direction of my career. Probably the first big one was in 1985, which was the Mexico City earthquake, where a lot of people, there were like 10,000 people that died, and a lot of downtown Mexico was impacted. So I felt a pull to go back home and to try to do something about it. And that allowed me an opportunity to use some of the things that I have learned to really become involved in doing crisis work. Uh, just a few months before, I had also, as I was completing my first practicum experience, uh, some people may remember the McDonald's massacre in San Isidro, which was one of the very first uh, shootings that really resulted in many casualties in the United States at the time. And I had an opportunity to do work with the survivors and with some of the people that had been there. So that really moved me in the direction of really trying to better understand trauma and how to respond to it. And I started to do a lot of that work. Um, After that one third of my career, I had an opportunity to work at the University of San Diego as director of the Counseling Center and Disability Services. So I went into academia. I had already had some experience doing some teaching, but working as an administrator in academia. And in there, it allowed me an opportunity to learn more about administration, learn more about budgets, learn more about developing programs. And what was really helpful and wonderful is that I was promoted to be the first assistant vice president of student wellness. And I started to oversee all of the wellness services, including the health center. So I started to think about how to create an integrated program for students. So we started to bring mental health services into the health center. We started to integrate wellness, prevention, alcohol and drug services, and started to think about it in a more integrated way. And I had a great staff, and we were able to do some very innovative things that really left a mark in terms of my development and my belief system about how we need to provide support and help. Working at the
Do you
university was help.
really really quickly on that point?
Yeah.
You mentioned having to dive into that administrative role and seeing how that side of it worked. Were there any can you just expand on that experience? Was that like completely new for you and doing that type of load?
I had had experience in some administrative roles in hospital settings and community clinics, but primarily as a clinical supervisor, not necessarily managing. But I had some experience with leadership as well. But in terms of being in charge of a budget, being in charge of the services, being in charge of how we're going to devise the services, trying to identify what direction we needed to go, providing a vision. That was the first time that I had an opportunity to actually do that and to have the resources to be able to implement. So it was useful that the experiences that I had been in leadership positions from the time I was young, even on a volunteer basis, to start really bringing together all those elements and those pieces to be able to then provide uh, guidance and leadership and a vision for the wellness services at the university, where I had an opportunity to work for about 15, 17 years.
Okay.
And evolving. And also, what that taught me is the importance of surrounding yourself with really good people.
Mm.
And I know as a manager, probably one of the most important responsibilities that we have is hiring.